Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Ask the Expert Live. My name is Crystal, and I'm one of the project managers at the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. This week has been an incredible week on the SADAG mental health calendar as we celebrate Support Group Awareness Week. As many of you may not know, over 30 years ago, SADAG started as a support group with over 70 people attending a support group meeting, advertised in the classified section of a newsletter or a newspaper rather. And it has now grown to what is known as the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And this year, being our 5th annual Support Group Awareness Week, we really wanted to focus on the topic of isolation to inclusion and connection through support. I am joined today by the absolutely incredible Dr. Kalinda Linde. She's a clinical psychologist in private practice since 1993. She specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety disorders, sleep issues, stress, and burnout. She is the founder of the CBT Group and also the creator of the only CBT self-help site in South Africa to date called Thoughts First. If you haven't visited the site, it is an absolutely must-do. The resources are incredible. Furthermore, she has also been involved with SADAG since 1999, so she is no stranger to the SADAG family, and she is currently our chairperson on the board. Dr. Kalinda, it is always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Wow, what an intro. Such a pleasure, Crystal. And thank you again to SADAG for all the support groups and for bringing mental health into center front, which is exactly where it's needed.
Dr. Kalinda, I know you have been one of our biggest advocates in regards to support groups. And again, for the public that may be watching this and hearing about support groups for the first time, SADAG has over 180 free support groups around the country. Dr. Kalinda Linde, tell us a little bit about the benefits of support groups.
Okay, so I think first and foremost, you feel like you're not alone because when you're struggling with your mental health or even physical health, you feel like it's just me. And yes, we go on Dr. Google, but it's not the same. And, when you're in a support group, typically you'll be with people who are currently going through the same struggle you are, or people who've actually been there with you, or, who've come out the other end. And that's when you can have genuine empathy. In our training, we were always taught to never say, I know what you mean, unless you really did. And I think that's the beauty at a support group, that pretty much everyone is in that room can say with authority, I've been there, I know how you're feeling. Or even if it's just, I'm where you are, we're in this situation together. I don't know how we're going to get out of this. So I think for me, maybe the key thing there would be that there's that genuine connection and that you're not alone in your struggle.
What would you say are some of the key mental health benefits of being part of a support group?
I think it's a lot of things. I think one of them is that emotional validation, which is that, okay, I'm feeling this is valid, this is real. And it's actually a safe space where you can express your feelings, you can express your experience without judgment. Because it is hard, if you're living with somebody who's going through, say, depression or chronic anxiety, it's quite difficult. Whereas here you are with other people who are in the same boat. So I think that helps quite a lot, a sense of belonging. And that's really important because we know that social isolation is extremely dangerous in terms of anxiety, depression, setting off an episode, bipolar, that kind of thing. And we also know that social isolation is processed in the same part of the brain that processes pain, physical pain. So it's like a psychological pain. So when you're in a group, at least you're countering that. So that helps a lot. And there's also a lot of normalizing that, okay, we're all here. So it's normalizing your mental health struggle, it's reducing the stigma. And you can also learn some healthier coping mechanisms. And this is really through shared learning and mutual encouragement. So there's a lot more I could say, but I think these are the main ones.
I think what you just said really resonated with me. And one of the reasons I love our Ask the Experts is because I've never watched one and not learned something. There's such a treasure trove of information. So just to repeat that and correct me if I've gotten it wrong, but social isolation triggers the same part of your brain that pain is triggered by. Is that
Well, it's
correct?
processed in the same part of the brain. Yeah, yeah. So it is an actual pain, you know. And so you can imagine if you're in pain and then you're in a support group where there are others who are saying, I know exactly what you're going through. And even people who've come out the other end, it's enormously helpful.
Enormously helpful. Dr. Linda, why do you think, or why is it that some people living with mental illness struggle to connect with others even when they want to?
No, I'm going to lay the blame squarely at the feet of stigma because there's often a feeling of shame. There's a feeling of rejection, you know, rejecting self, being rejected by others. I mean, nobody chooses to have chronic mental health problems, do they? I know that it can be exhausting. You can get compassion fatigue when you're the carer. And so then often people will interject that I am bad and I am this thing. So it's very much about stigma, shame, rejection, often low self-esteem. You're just exhausted and you theoretically would like some help, but you're just even too tired to reach out, you know, to get on the phone, to get on the net, to actually go and physically attend a support group meeting. So I think it's a lot about that. And then, of course, fear, which goes with stigma. You know, if I open up about this dread diagnosis, what are people going to think of me? Am I then going to be seen as weak, as negative in some way? And yeah, so then I'd rather just struggle on my own and I need the help, but I feel embarrassed or weak or stupid or the words to that effect to actually ask for it. Yeah, so it's very much internal barriers.
It's so interesting that you touch on that. STADAG actually earlier this week on Wednesday held two connection circles where we allowed members of the public, or encouraged rather than allowed, encouraged members of the public to come and watch a real life support group unfold. This was something we've never done before, obviously because of the safety and the confidentiality reasons. And at the beginning of the connection circle, I asked the audience to kind of engage and touch base on how they were feeling, very honestly feeling at the beginning of the meeting, and giving themselves a rating from 1 to 10. And after they'd observed the support group meeting take place, we asked them to again give themselves a rating from 1 to 10. And to see the difference in nearly every single person on that webinar's score, self-assessment, from not even participating actively in the group, but just watching people share and being vulnerable and relating to one another was absolutely beautiful. And I totally agree. There is so much stigma and so much shame, and it's how do we break down those barriers, especially when we know people living with mental illness, they have firsthand experience of what it's like. But for someone who hasn't lived with a mental illness or hasn't struggled with their mental health on a long-term basis, how do you how can they possibly relate to someone living with a mental illness? And I think that's where we get this dismissiveness. Just get over it, think positively, look how lucky you are.
Yeah.
And we need to change that. And I think that's why support groups are so beautiful, because they create that space that you speak about, where it's not just someone saying, I know how you're feeling, but who genuinely has a understanding or some understanding because they faced similar stigma in the past. And that in itself can be empowering.
Mm. Very much so. You know, I think as humans, we go through many things. So, you know, typically in our training as clin psychs, we always used to chuckle that we all had kind of wild lives and childhoods, and it was actually worth it because you could relate to so many things. And, you know, we've all been through sadness, through suffering, through loss. And so it might not be your loss, but it'll be something comparable. So I think if we go in with a mind of curiosity, and non-judgment. You know, stigma is one of my favorite topics to try and debunk. And one of my stories that I always tell is if you look at nature, so say you've got a cat sitting over here, and then over here it sees a dog or another cat or a mouse or a bird or a frog or something foreign. And when the cat looks at that, the cat is simply looking at, is that a friend? Is it a foe? Is it food? Is it a mate? What is it? So it's discriminating between I'm this and that is that. But there's no judgment. Or even in nature, when there's something colorful and not colorful, there's no judgment. So sadly for us, humans can discriminate. Okay, I'm not going through a depression right now, but fine. So I'm that 2 in the 3 who's not going through that. And that person there is the 1 in the 3 who's struggling with their mental health. Sure, nothing wrong with discriminating that we're in different places, but stop there. But we don't stop there. This is when we then start with a judgment. You shouldn't be, or why are you, or surely you could. Just snap out of it. And I think that's the difficulty. So in a support group, because everybody's on the same page, there's a level playing field. There's a lot less of that judgment. So you can discriminate as in, oh, you're not quite as far along as you could be. Okay, let me help you. I remember what it was like there. So you see this with all the SADC support groups, and you see this in the AA programs and NA programs, that kind of thing. They're very successful because there are people who've been there and they're here now to try and help others. But this is another whole topic.
I have time. But I loved your cat analogy, and I think it's so fitting, to observe, to learn, to understand without judgment. And a big focus of this week is the power of connecting with others. And I'm very mindful while we speak of, while support group may be safe spaces, they're also an isolated pocket within a week or every second week where we have these meetings. How do family members support loved ones living with a mental illness where they don't necessarily have that understanding or that first-hand experience?
I think step 1 is to understand. So think about, you need a diagnosis before you can get treated. So say you walk into your GP, that's what they're going to do first. But what are they going to do first? They're going to listen. So if we're looking at family members, and this is obviously a long-term relationship in most cases, they at times are going to be stepping in as the carer. At times they're not going to have a clue what to do. So keep it short, keep it simple. You can just literally ask, what do you need? So sometimes people just need a good cry and they just need you to bring them tea, or they just need you to leave them alone. Sometimes they need to just speak it. Sometimes they want to be distracted and watch something together with you. So just ask, what do you need? And then keep quiet and actually listen. So that's one thing you could do. The other thing that I think is equally important is for yourself, if you're the caregiver or in that role or the supporter. What do you need? So, say if you're running a support group, what do you need? Where are you at? What's your capacity? And it's very much about that. Asking yourself the same question with the same compassion. And when you're having an empathy failure, recognizing, oh, I think I'm in need of something myself, and then communicating that, I'm just needing a little bit of time to regroup. I'm so sorry I can't be there in the way you need me to be there right now. Um, I'll be back. And I think that's the important thing, that what are we trying to do? We're trying to act all brave and I'm on top of this. And then eventually we get compassion fatigue. We have no empathy and we're angry and cynical. We do more harm. And then we ourselves can actually have a crash. So it's very much about just being aware of, where am I at? What do you need? What do I need? What's your capacity? Understanding, say, when you're depressed or anxious, this would be your capacity or your lack of. You as well. What's your capacity right now to give, and give what is appropriate.
I love that term, an empathy failure. And I think it's probably something that everyone sitting and watching this today has experienced, where it's just like, I can't do this, or snaps, or loses their temper. So I think you raised such an important point about the role of caregivers and loved ones in supporting family members with mental illness. And how can we also support those family members and loved ones who are supporting the people? What if they are experiencing that absolute empathy failure? How can they be there for themselves while also prioritizing a loved one that might be in a critical kind of state in regards to their mental health?
You know, there's the saying, it takes a village, and that's exactly it. And, you know, again, this might sound a bit ranty, but only 5% of the health budget in South Africa is spent on mental health. And there's something like 3,000 psychologists, I think 850 psychiatrists, and 60 million people. Yeah, quite a lot. So you can see, I mean, I can't do maths, but goodness, you can see that there's not enough. And so SADAG definitely has stepped in terms of educating the public, all of these support groups, phone counselors, that is part of it. And so really, I think step one is education. Understand what is it that we're dealing with. Step two, knowing that something like compassion fatigue exists. This is a thing, you know, knowing how depression works, that this person isn't just being difficult, that they have this negative cognitive filter and cognitive distortions. Someone in a panic attack, it doesn't help to try and tell them snap out of it. There are other things you can do, breathe with them. So I think education is a big one. And again, circling back to compassion fatigue, it's a thing. In fact, parenting fatigue is something that's come up. I first saw it last year. Yes, because of that relentlessness. So I think we're all fatigued, and it's really about capacity. So rest and have a little bit of joy in your life. Those are two things I can immediately say. Get out into nature, have a bit of normality. You know, nobody in the medical world is on shift 24/7, but as a loved one, you actually are. That's not right. So, you know, people come off shift. What do they do off their shift? They don't do another job, preferably. They rest and maybe they go and watch a movie and maybe they sit on the couch a bit. So it's really about that balance. And I think we need to destigmatize mental health, you know, that it's like cancer, it's like having had surgery. You know, that there's an episode or a procedure, then there's a phase of recovery, and you move out of it, and you've got a village helping you with that recovery. So you're one person in that village. And so you've got to have your own village as well. And you can see it, it's very much something South Africa understands is that connectedness. You know, we don't always understand everybody else's culture, but there's certainly, if there's one thing, if we can get behind a rugby team like we do when our people are playing, I'm not necessarily that patriotic about sport, but when it's the Springboks, then I am. And you can see it if you look at people who are watching. So if we could take that into the rest of the space and into the mental health space, that would be amazing. We know how. We just have to think, okay, bring that village and connectedness into the mental health space as well.
So really emphasizing for both the person living with the mental illness as well as their caregiver
Yeah.
to identify and find those villages.
Yes.
And I suppose as well in that relationship, it's also a mutual relationship, and we don't want to disempower the person living with the mental illness. So how could we navigate those boundaries so that we're leaning on them for mutual support, but we're not burdening them or overshadowing them?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you see, this is where a support group comes in, because that's the point. You know, the group was that connection, the cohesion, the belonging, the safe place where there's less judgment, you know, people who have real proper empathy. So I have seen SADAG has got some support groups for people themselves going through a mental health situation. Some of them are for families, some of them are for the caregivers. So I think that's really powerful. You know, just know where you're at and what your capacity is. So you don't have to feel guilty if you haven't got capacity, but be honest about it. Don't ever lie to yourself. So if you're in a phase where you're feeling, I just haven't got it, I don't know what to say to you, say so. You know, and then obviously don't stop there. Then find somebody else who can actually fill in for you. And for you, when you're in an episode, you know, just because you're in an episode of anxiety or depression, it's not that that's there 24/7. you know that, okay, I'm being quite challenging right now. I know I'm being negative. I know I'm being heavy. I'm sorry. So also we can own that depending on which side we are. Most people, maybe not in a psychosis or in a very, very acute situation, but the rest of the time, it's like when you have cancer or a disease or you've had surgery, that you're in a vulnerable place. So we're just not honest enough. And I think this is where a support group gives you that space where you can experiment. Oh, I got to say that and nobody freaked out. Okay. So this is a legitimate feeling. And that is where it starts.
Building that trust by sharing honestly and being aware, I think, of our limitations is what you're really emphasizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Kalinda, one of the things that we really pride ourselves at SADAG and really focus on within the support group sector is first do no harm. And obviously, the majority of SADAG support groups are run by patients for patients. And there is a role that support groups can play, and there is a role where we need the professional, the mental health experts. Keeping in mind the first do no harm, what would be the role of one-on-one therapy compared to the emotional support you might get from a support group? How do they differ, but how are they both pieces of a puzzle that can fit together beautifully?
So you've already answered that, which is it's a both and. So the one-on-one therapy is a more personalized, in-depth support, and you would tailor that to the individual person, their unique needs, their history, their struggles. And so it's a very focused, more private conversation. And obviously with a trained professional who's got specific knowledge and can give you specific strategies. So that's this side. But then on that side, we are not islands. So the support group is that sense of community. And this is where you can share experiences. And, the therapist, even if you've been in exactly that situation, it's not about your session. So you're not going to unpack your experience with the person. You can share a few things here and there, but it's really about them. So when you're in the actual group setting, that's more that sort of just share it. You're not even really thinking about what you're saying. You can just let it out. And others can be, oh, yeah, when that happened, then this and this. So it's much more holding, shall we say. And yes, of course, you can get advice and techniques and things, but it's not going to be as personalized, but it doesn't have to be. So, think about a procedure. Here's the expert, say the surgeon who does whatever they do. And then afterwards, you've got the nurses and the visitors and the staff. And so you need both of them. And then that makes it holistic. Then you really have the best of both worlds.
I love that the surgeon and the nurses and the support team that are there. Often we find callers feel a little bit frustrated if they want to join a support group, but we can really tell that they're experiencing emotional distress. They haven't seen a mental health practitioner. They don't necessarily have a diagnosis. Maybe they visited Google. Obviously, not all of our groups would require a diagnosis, but in the case where we are concerned about the individual and we're not sure that they're ready to be part of a support group, maybe you can share a little bit about why that one-on-one intervention is so important.
I think, like I said some time ago, that you need a diagnosis. And I know diagnosis, nobody wants a label as such, but it's just if you go to the doctor and they say, look, you've got a sinus thing versus a flu thing, then they know what they need to give you, more or less how long it's going to last. So I think with a support group and when somebody calls into SADAG, there is already an individual conversation going on. And the emphasis is on connection. I'm here, I'm listening. And sometimes in that conversation, it might not be a clin-psych on the other end of the phone, be it an individual calling in or be it somebody calling a support group leader. But you're listening. And in the conversation, when you're explaining, this is what I think I'm dealing with, this is how I'm feeling, that human connection makes a huge difference. And I'm actually reminded of just how important that is. So I did my doctorate a number of years ago, and it was on cancer and on the experience of anxiety and, how do you handle the anxiety at the time of diagnosis. So I designed an intervention. In those days, we didn't have PhDs that were coursework, it was a proper dissertation. And so we had to design an original intervention and then go and test it. And I was very proud of my intervention. It had some guided imagery and a bit of cognitive behavior therapy and well researched, and it did have a good impact. So I did the intervention where people had had the procedure, the mammogram, and they were waiting for the result. So obviously you would be really anxious then. And I was trying to find a way. How would you help with the overt and the covert anxiety? And to my great shock, the intervention worked very well. But the feedback from every single person, and there were 40 in my sample, was that just having me there was actually almost as helpful as the intervention. So I could have said anything, and just having someone there who was just with them and just listening. And some of them couldn't even remember the intervention. But it was just that the fact that you were here. And of course, initially I was horrified because what do you mean my fancy intervention, wasn't so fancy? And they were, no, no, it's just that you were with me. So if you think about that, um, whether you're speaking to somebody who's a support group leader, or whether you're speaking to somebody who's a counselor at SADAG, or whether you're speaking to a trained professional, the key things are I'm being heard. This is a safe space. Obviously, the ClinPsych can help you diagnose, but you're the first line. And sometimes people will contact a support group before they contact any of us. And so you're the first line. So the containment, the empathy, if you don't know what the diagnosis is, you can say, well, this sounds like it's a rough kind of period that you're going through. I don't know if it's burnout or depression, but maybe it would be a good idea to speak to your GP, try and find a therapist, etc. So it's that human connection here. That's what makes the difference. And then afterwards, you can put the layering group or the therapy or medication on top of that.
That's so beautiful. And I think what this chat has really kind of highlighted for me is the power of connection. So let's look bigger picture, more general, outside of support groups. Just for anyone who may be watching here today, whether they have a mental illness, whether they are feeling great and positive, how can we start building better connections in our everyday lives?
Human connection is a core need. There's a very small percentage of people who we call various things asocial, hermits, etc. Yes, there is a very small percentage, less than 5, who don't seem to need the human connection. But whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, the extrovert brain likes sensation, so it wants more quantity, and the introvert brain prefers more, now and then. And so perhaps we could say it wants more quality or, more occasional. Think of a cat versus a dog. The cat will kind of look at you when you come home, the dog is there. So we are built different. However, very, very few things thrive when they're not connecting. And there's some horrible studies that were done with monkeys and when they were little. I'm really not going to traumatize all the people watching, but let's just say this was in the horrible old days when they still did this kind of research. But the little animals would rather have comfort than food. And I think that was quite important. They'd rather have the warmth and comfort of something where they felt a bit of a connection than actually feeding themselves from a metal thing. So, that's us. So we all want that human connection. So let's begin by looking at the human in each other. We're very quick to judge. Oh, don't like what you're doing. Oh, can't believe you said that. Oh, you're so unpleasant. Or I don't like you. You're not meeting my need. So if we can just see the humanness, especially in the mental health context, that everybody's going through something. So I'm going to come at this from a Buddhist angle, where the original Buddha Shakyamuni said we're all mentally ill. What did he mean? He leveled the playing field. He said we all have attachment, we all have pride, we all have anger, we all have jealousy, etc. So I think if we can, I often think of that tongue in cheek, that okay, it's no different. We're all going through those internal struggles every day. So some people, it's a depression or an anxiety or a bipolar on top of. But yeah, we're all human going through stuff. So if we can see the humanness and just let's connect. The image of if you see ants who are in a pond or something, they all band together and then they make a little raft and they get to wherever they need to go collectively. And I think that's what we're missing. We're these individuals in silos. So if we can just see the human, even as an introvert, I am an introvert, but I still like to connect. And there's the humanness in whatever shape or form. That's what we need to keep in mind. It's simple. Just see the human in the other one. See through the behavior, see through the actions. There's a humanness in here. We all want the same things, to be happy. So that's really my advice.
That's honestly so beautiful, and I think it's definitely going to be my take home for this week from today is look for the human in each other. I, I honestly think that is so beautiful, and I think we're so busy and there's so much going on, and so often we're all at the end of our tether. We're just hanging on there. And we forget to see the human in each other, but also within ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So this is really bringing it full circle. That we're talking about this and we have people listening to us. So it's really very much about not what we say, but what we do. So, think about when you're a parent. I know this from my own kids. They'd be, but mom, why do we have to whatever, whatever, because you're not? And I remember hating that as a child. But think about if you're in a position of leadership or you're a parent or what we're doing now, we're in a position where people are listening to us. We can speak with the mouth, but what we actually do and how it feels is going to be what makes the difference. So if we're feeling the human in each other, if we're feeling the lack of stigma, the lack of judgment, so it's very much what we do. And I think that's perhaps the most important thing at a support group, that everybody who's there wants to be there. Somebody who started a group starts it because they want to. All of us who are part of SADAG, we give hours, we give time, we give energy because we want to. And we want to demonstrate through being and our presence that we take mental health seriously. We don't believe in stigma. We don't want to label. We want to help. We want to make a difference. We want to advocate. So it is very much about that. That at the end of the day, it's if we can model that and demonstrate that, yeah, we'll influence everybody around us. Eventually, all of us ants will be banding together and things will change.
Can we maybe not be ants? Can we be other creatures?
We can be. Yeah, we don't want to be ants in an ocean. No.
um, Dr. Linda, a few last two questions because I do know that our time is running out. How can we support people who feel hopeless or stuck in their struggles?
I think I've alluded to that earlier, which is just be there. Just be there. Sometimes you don't need to say anything. Just be there. Okay. I remember this many years ago. I had a breakup. I must have been about 20. And my mom was not a very chatty person, but, much more practical. And she brought a cup of tea. She came and sat in my room and she brought me some tea and I had tea. And she just sat there. And I didn't really speak much and I was wailing a bit and, oh, nobody will ever love me. The things we do at that age. And she was just there, you know. And, think about many years later when she passed away, my dogs were just there, especially the one would follow me around, very empathic and just be there, just be there. So sometimes you don't need to say a thing. You just have to be there. And if you are going to be there with a good heart, feeling, okay, I'm ready, I'm listening. And again, like I said earlier, just ask, what do you need? And if I can give it and I can give it in a healthy way, good. If I can't, I'll find you someone who can. So that really would be a summary of what I think would be the best thing.
Dr. Linda, I think today has been so incredibly special, and I think you've really shared humanness with me today, and I'm so grateful of that, and I know that our audience will be too. And it's always such a pleasure. You are wise beyond words. And so thank you so much for spending some time and connecting with me today. And for anyone who's watching this, whenever you do end up watching this, just a reminder that there is hope and there is help, and there are people at the other end of the phone who are wanting to connect with you, who want to share that humanness with you. And so either give us a call on one of our helplines, or you can also visit our website, www.sadag.org. And there's a whole tab dedicated to support groups, how to join them, how to start them, what support groups are available, where they're available. Again, Dr. Linda, thank you so very much.
Always a pleasure, Crystal, and thank you for asking all the right questions. And I really love what you said. You know, at the end of the day, it's about giving hope. So when you feel helpless and you can't do it yourself, if somebody else can lend you a little bit of their hope, it makes a huge difference. So well done to SADAG, and shout out to all the support group leaders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Karabo, you